All right, are we at the title slide or slide number 7?
We're at slide
Title
number
slide.
1 right now, and then we're just going to get to slide number 7 now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I can just.
Next slide is showing the ASR33 Teletype Machine and the paper tape. A lot of you have talked, I've listened to many conversations on the first machine you learned to program on, and it's the Commodore 64. It's, you know, the VIC-20, it's the TI-99-4A, it's, you know, one of those personal computers. Well, guys, this is the computer, this is the machine I learned to program on. I got a book of the basic programming language in the fall of 1968, and I wrote my programs out on paper. I took that paper to this machine where I typed out my program and punched out that program on the paper tape, as you see to the right there. And then, now the picture of this particular machine doesn't have it, but on the one that I used when I was let's see, I was 14 at the time. It had an acoustic coupler on the right-hand side, and we would dial up the number and put the phone receiver in the acoustic coupler, and then feed in our paper tape and debug our program, make the changes, run the program, and when we were all done, we would start the punch machine and punch out a new version of the program with our latest changes. This is honestly where I started. It was an interesting time. Like I said, personal computers didn't come into play until the late 70s, and I was already working full time as a programmer then. Radhika, can we move to the next slide? This next slide shows a picture of the IBM 360 mainframe. My first job as a professional programmer was writing code for this machine, mostly in COBOL. I wrote some IBM assembly language code when the need arose. I also used Report Program Generator, or RPG, the original RPG programming language for reports. But this machine had 3 partitions, so it was a multiprocessing machine. We had 3 partitions, and each of the 3 partitions we could run programs up to 70K in size. Now the IBM on the top of that machine, I'm a little over 6 foot tall, and that IBM was just a little above my eye line. So this is a rather large machine, but you have to remember, this was the standard of the day when I started programming full-time in 1976. That typewriter on the right was the console, and that was how you communicated with the machine. Never in my experience did we spend much time actually touching the knobs on the front of that machine. But this was the standard of the day. We ran all of our business programs in COBOL on that machine. It was kind of getting outdated at the time, so as I developed my skills, a new type of computer came into play called the mini computer. And the mini computer did not require an air-conditioned room, so you could kind of put it in most any office. It was smaller in size. It had cathode ray tube type monitors to it. The one I transitioned to when I was working on the IBM 360, we transitioned to the Data General Nova computer. After a couple of years of working on that, I transitioned to another job where I worked with the Digital Equipment Corporation's PDP 1170. And then in another job, I worked with the TI-990 business computer. These were all called mini computers. On the TI-990, there were aspects that TI did not build into the operating system. So I became an assembly language programmer on the TI 990, and I wrote device drivers so we could communicate via RS-232 communications through serial communications. From there, I transitioned, and if Radhika, if you would change to the next slide, is to the Wang BS100. Again, this was in the class of computers at the time we called mini computers. They were quite powerful. Entire businesses ran on them. But you have to remember that in these days, most businesses could not afford to run an IBM 360 mainframe type computer. They just were too costly. They required extensive air-conditioned rooms, sealed off rooms, and the mini computer changed all that. It allowed normal businesses, manufacturing businesses, and distribution businesses, retail businesses, to all have their own computer in their own building. And that was fairly advanced in the day. So the Wang BS100 was one of the more advanced machines of the time. And the company I worked for built a retail accounting system package. We built that and had customers all over the world that used that retail accounting package. My specialty was retail point of sale systems, and I would get those retail point of sale systems to communicate via leased lines. There was no internet at the time. We used leased lines, and we used telephone lines. If you remember the early days of bulletin board systems, you used asynchronous modems for communication. But asynchronous modems had 1 to 2 they had a start bit and 1 to 2 stop bits before every character that was sent. And most of the communication we did with the Wang BS100 was via synchronous communication. And there was a signal, that a standard pulse that went on the line. And if you synchronized to that pulse, you didn't need those start and stop bits, so you could get more data in a shorter period of time across the line. Throughout the 80s, I worked with the Wang BS100, but in the mid-80s, Radhika, if we could go to the next slide. In the mid-80s, Hewlett-Packard was one of the leading companies that led the charge towards Unix. Unix kind of became a very strong player, kind of took over the mini computer market, and offered, instead of the proprietary operating systems that the Data General Nova and the DEC PDP 1170 and later in DEC's world, the DEC VAX line of computers, and the Wang BS, they all had proprietary operating systems. The companies that manufactured the computers also wrote the operating system. And Hewlett-Packard was really a leader in that they led the change towards a standard operating system, that operating system being Unix. And so I started working with the HP UX flavor of Unix. And Radhika, if we could go to the next slide, that transitioned on towards the IBM Unix version called AIX on their RS-6000. And now by this time, I was working more in the back office of a company that provided retail point of sale systems. And I developed a point of sale audit system that ran on the Unix systems, first on the HP UX and then on the RS-6000. And we needed a database, and that database, we made a deal with Sybase. And so I started working with Sybase in Unix on the RS-6000. And in 1993, I went to a seminar in Toronto. I drove from Cleveland. I live in Cleveland. And I drove from Cleveland to Toronto to go to something called a Windows Strategy Seminar. Radhika, if you'll go to the next slide. We're showing the Intel server with Windows or Linux.
Yes.
And so in Toronto, I went to this Windows Strategy Seminar, and they introduced a brand new operating system called Windows NT. They gave us all books and talked about the future of computing, all working around Windows NT. And that really, although it didn't seem like a big deal at the time, it really made a significant change. And the operating systems that we're working with today are generally Windows or Linux, mostly running on Intel-based platforms. But that whole process started in about, like I said, 1993. Radhika, if we can move to the next slide. Backing up again just a little bit, when I started, I worked for Dow Chemical, and we typed up punch cards to enter in all of our data into the systems. I would read these punch cards in and send the data down to the Dow mainframe down in Houston, Texas, and then the next morning they would send back all of the reports that the engineers required. Those of you who know me know I really like automation. I do everything to try and automate everything. There's actually 6 programmable modes of this IBM 129 key punch, and I learned how to program them just to save myself the time so that I could format the cards correctly. But again, Radhika, next slide. From the punch cards, we loaded the data onto magnetic tape using tape drives like the one on the left. The disk drives, as you see on the right, those were actually, for the most part, temporary storage. The principal storage was on mag tape. In sequential files, we would load that sequential data into ISAM files on the disk and do the work against those sequential files, or those ISAM files, ISAM being Index Sequential Access Method. Think of a clustered index as the entire file. So that's kind of what ISAM was. And we would do all of our processing there. And then, Radhika, the next slide would be slide number 16. I'm showing an entity relationship diagram. This happens to be my modified Northwind database that I use for some of my presentations. But in 1992 timeframe, I started working with relational databases, moving from the sequential and ISAM data file types into the world of relational databases. And of course, that changed my world. I've absolutely loved working with the relational database model. To this day, I still think it's the best, most consistent way to store your data. But it was a driving force in my life throughout those early years to constantly be moving to the newer technology and learning how to do things more effectively using that latest technology. And because of that, I ended up essentially where I am today. So let's go to the next header slide. The next header slide says, where we are today. So what do we have today? Again, next slide, Radhika, please. We're storing our data both relationally and in non-relational data stores. SQL Server, whether you're storing it in IBM DB2 or Oracle or another relational model, the relational model is still valid. It still works wonderfully well. Business critical data that needs to support the solid business decisions, I still think the relational store is the best place. But there's also MongoDB for non-relational data. There's Hortonworks, Hadoop, those data stores. There's Azure Data Lake for for your large amounts of data, Databricks, the Azure Data Warehouse. There's a significant breadth of ways and locations to store data, and they all are valid for the types of applications that you need. You know, you're not going to store Twitter feeds, if you will, in a relational database. It doesn't make sense, right? There's just too much data and it comes in too fast. And what you're looking for there is trends, not specific values, if you will. So, so you're going to continue to use the data storage methodology that works best for your environment. Radhika, if we could go to the next slide. So which one do we use? Again, it depends. What are you trying to do with the data? Are you trying to store transactional data, the history of the orders, from customers, and the parts that you've built and what customers you've sent those parts to? Whether it's a stream of data, like I mentioned before, whether that's coming in from Twitter or from some type of measuring device that's keeping track of large amounts of data that's running through your warehouse, whether you're storing that in a data warehouse for decision, long-term decision-based processing. We just talked about all of the various ways you can store your data. Use the one that is the most appropriate to your environment. If you've not worked with one, go figure it out. Figure out which one is going to work for your environment. What's the best source for the business decisions that you have to use? And that's really the most important thing to remember, is that your job is to help your company make the best decisions it can make so that it can be successful. How do you store that data in a way that is accessible to the people that have to make the decisions, in a way that allows them to make those decisions effectively? All right, so let's go to the next slide. How do I prepare for that change? Next slide again, Radhika. Change?
Yes.
No. Are we on the slide that starts with change?
Yes, we are. We are on the
Excellent. Excellent. So, how many of you have talked to the person that says, "Yeah, I've got 15 years experience as a DBA," and they're doing the same thing they did at the end of the first year as a DBA? So does that DBA have 15 years of experience, or does that DBA have 15 iterations of 1 year of experience? What you want to do is you want to be in a place where you're always growing. Growth is important both for your company and for you. I've had a number of discussions with people over the years. What was right for me was to keep a breadth of knowledge across the data industry, and I wasn't so focused on a particular vertical industry. So, for example, back in the early 80s, I worked for a company that manufactured the keys that you could use you'd go to the hardware store and buy a new set of keys, and have a machine that would carve that key so that it matched your door lock, right? I worked for the company that made those keys. I could have followed a vertical path and grown as a manager within that company, but then my fate is reliant on that particular industry. My path, I chose to stay what I call horizontal, and I focused on understanding all I needed to do in the world of IT, so that I could stay relevant regardless of what company I was with. So it's important for you to understand what direction you want to take and make that fit with what's right for the company. In the late 90s, I was working for a company and I was serving as a DBA. I was doing some development work. I was kind of their network specialist, and they decided they didn't need a DBA anymore. And of course, I was upset with that decision, and I chose to leave the company because I felt that being a DBA was a better decision for me personally, as opposed to staying with that company and following their vertical path. So you have to decide what's right for your career. How do you do that? Radhika, if we could move to the next slide. The first thing you want to do is read. Read everything you can about your industry and the things that are interesting to you. Back as I was going through, it was magazines. It was SQL Server Magazine. It was PC Magazine. It was the various industry trends, technology magazines. Today, it's mostly websites. The magazines have pretty much gone to the wayside as far as print magazines. But you've got Gartner reports. PC Magazine still has a tremendous website for that kind of information. IT Pro, the website for IT Pro. Information Week has an excellent website to keep track of the trends, the things that are going on in the industry, so that you can stay on top of the things that matter to you and the things that are interesting to you. Because if it stops being interesting to you, then that's when you're going to fall behind in your career. Blog posts are extremely important as well. Find the key industry leaders. Use Twitter and, well, this is social media down below, but find those industry leaders. SQL Skills has a tremendous set of blog posts. Radicat, Reza and Leila from New Zealand have tremendous information in the BI space. There's a blog collective site called Machine Learning Mastery that I discovered, as well as the one called AI Trends. These places kind of compile various blog posts from industry leaders, and those are places you can use to stay on top of things. And then, of course, social media. Use things like LinkedIn, like Twitter, like Instagram. Find out what people are saying. There's a hashtag that Aaron Nelson created years and years ago called SQLHELP. And you can, if you follow that hashtag, look at the questions people are asking and look at the answers that are coming and who's answering those questions. You want to follow those people that are answering those questions and see what they're saying about things. This is another way for you to follow the people that give you the information that is most interesting to you, whether it be Denny Cherry and Joey D'Antoni and David Klee in the hardware space, or Paul Randall, Kimberly Tripp, Kaylin Delaney on the SQL Server Engine space, whether it be Reza and Leila in the BI space, Melissa Coates from Blue Granite in the BI space, Andy Leonard also in the BI space. There's so many people that are just a wealth of information on the direction that industry is going. Find them, follow them, and then when they reference somebody, go follow them. So keep track of what people are doing and who's saying what. Radhika, if we can move to the next slide. You want to train yourself. Don't rely on your company to provide you the training. The training is really yours. It's your responsibility for your own training. There's plenty of free content out there. So there's online content. Obviously, you're with us tonight. Well, tonight for me, it's 9:42 p.m. Here in Cleveland, Ohio. But you're with us for the 24 hours of PASS. PASS has session recordings from previous summits. There's a wealth of information there. There's Pluralsight has a tremendous site for a longer period of training for full topics. PASS offers virtual chapter meetings that you can attend live, or you can look at the recordings. Locally, you can go to user group meetings. In fact, here in Cleveland, we just had a user group meeting last night where Eric Blinn did a wonderful presentation on different types of indexing in SQL Server. There are user group meetings going on all over the world. PASS has a great resource for finding those, so take advantage of that. Regional events, the SQL Saturdays. Last Saturday, I was down in Cincinnati, Ohio for the SQL Saturday in Cincinnati. This coming Saturday, I'll be in Madison, Wisconsin for the event there. These are wonderful 3 days of training that you don't have to ask your company to pay for, that you can go to, and you can stay on top of the technology. International events, PASS Summit. The PASS Summit, Radhika mentioned the PASS Summit November 5th in Seattle this year. I attended my first PASS Summit in 2003, and I will tell you right now, it changed my life. I met people that did the same thing I did for the first time in my career. I've been a DBA for a long time, and for the most part, I was the only person on staff that had that responsibility. It was so wonderful to meet all the other people that did the things that I did and to learn from them. And I got to know them. I've made friends again all over the world. One of the people that I met that year in 2003, Johan Bijmans from over in Belgium. Johan and I were exchanging messages today. He was helping me out with a problem at one of my clients. So the connections you make at these events will help you for years and years and years. In beginning of March, I was in Manchester, England for SQL Bits. That, again, a tremendous conference, an opportunity to meet people and to talk to people. These are the ways that you can learn how to do your job better. Radhika, if we can move forward one more slide. And then if you don't try things, then you probably won't retain them. Set up a test environment. Now there's a number of ways that you can set up machines in your workstation environments. There's Hyper-V that Microsoft provides. I personally use VMware Workstation extensively. A close friend of mine, Kendall Van Dyke, who now works for Microsoft, introduced me to Oracle's VirtualBox because that tool is free. And now containers have become everything, right? Containers are kind of like lightweight VMs where you don't have to have full operating system in each virtual machine. It's just you can have just a SQL Server container running on your Windows box, and it will run independently of your Windows box, but it will use the operating system features of your Windows box, right? It's a way for you to try things, come up with ideas. It's April and golf season just started, so I played golf this afternoon, and last year I took over my golf league because people kept quitting the golf course, and I said, "So look, I'll take care of things," right? So I'm doing the collection of scores, and I'm starting to learn Power BI so that I can put up a website and share with my league the trends in their golf scores over the season. It's the kind of thing it's an opportunity to learn using something that's interesting to you. Find something in your personal life that's interesting and start gathering data on it, and then use these tools that we're talking about to learn more on how to be a better person for your company using those tools. But you can practice with things that are just interesting to you, right? SQL Server Development Edition is free, so download it and install it, and come up with things that will help you help your company. So, Radhika, the last slide. Questions. Unfortunately, I don't have access to the GoToWebinar interface, so I can't see your questions. So, Radhika, if there are questions, could you ask,
Yes,
read them to
absolutely.
me so I can answer?
Absolutely. If there is, if you have any question, please put the question on the chat or ask us, and Alan will respond to you.
When PASS approached me about the session, they said, "Look, you've been around for a long time. Tell us about what you've done." So that was essentially the motivation behind this session. So I hope I didn't bore you too much with my 45 years of IT experience, but sometimes it's important to understand that we didn't just start with laptops, right? We didn't start with even the Commodore. Right? Back funny in the late 80s, I was the president of the Cleveland area Amiga user group. So any of you Amiga users, I'm one of you. So,
I have a question. In 1992, you said you work with other databases. What other databases were in that time? I heard
sure.
about
Well, I worked.
DB2, or I don't know.
Yeah.
You know better.
Yeah. No. In the late 70s, in 1979, I worked for Gould Ocean Systems, and at that point, I wasn't working with databases. I was working with the DEC PDP 1170 and writing code in BASIC for them. But there were a couple guys on staff who were DBAs working with DB2, and I saw that they were treated differently, and I kind of thought that was cool. But in 1992, I started working on a project with Sherwin-Williams Corporation. And that was my first exposure to relational databases, and it was Oracle version 6. And I spent 6 months on that project, and then I changed to a new customer that I worked as a consultant for about 6 months, and then I joined as an employee, where Oracle was too expensive for them. They wanted that back office. I mentioned the back office for the retail product. And Oracle was too expensive. At the time, Informix owned the retail market, but Informix was just too important to return the phone calls for the company that I ended up working for. But Sybase was just bent over backwards to help us out. And so in 1992, I started working with Sybase. I went out to Emeryville, California, took a couple classes, and learned how to use and manage the Sybase SQL Server version 4.2 on Unix. And so we implemented our solution with that environment. And then in 1995, when Microsoft introduced SQL Server 6.0, which was still mostly the Sybase code, but 1995 was when Sybase and Microsoft took two different paths. And Microsoft went to SQL Server 6.0, and Sybase jumped to their version to 10.0. And I've pretty much stayed with the Microsoft SQL Server track ever since 1995. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that answered the question. So one question is on the chat is about could you please tell me what is the hashtag?
The hashtag I mentioned earlier was SQLHELP, SQLHELP. And people ask questions about SQL Server there, and other people answer them. And what you learn a lot.
Yes, yes.
Yep, you'll learn a lot from that hashtag. And again, Aaron Nelson was the one that came up with that idea, and thanks to him for that. Anything else?
Jazz Jude again from PassHQ. Another question that came up is, did you ever have any breaks in between? Like, did you ever have a break in your work, and how did that impact your life?
Did I ever have a break in my work? Interestingly enough, in in 2000, I joined a .com that was focused on building applications to allow parents to communicate with the school district that their child went to. And it was an application that the company I worked for was essentially selling to school districts, both public and private. And so I designed the database for them and was responsible for migrating data from their old information systems or whatever information system they were using into our website environment. I was there for a couple of years, but if you remember what the .com world was like, it wasn't real stable, and the company I worked for ran out of funds. So I left there in 2002, and I was essentially without a full-time job from summer of 2002 until the spring of 2003. It was a little uncomfortable. I managed to get short-term consulting gigs because I did know SQL Server pretty well at the time, but it wasn't anything long-term until the spring of 2003. And then I got that job, and that was the job where the boss said, "What do you want to do for education?" And I told him I wanted to go to the PASS Summit, and the rest is history, as they say. But then in about 2005, that company decided to split into two companies. And I thought, I better get a degree. So I started working on getting a bachelor's degree, because up until that point, I didn't have one. And in 2008, I graduated from Baldwin-Wallace College, at the time university now, with a bachelor's degree in computer information systems. And I did that when I was 54 years old. So that was kind of covering myself. But also in the range of 2005 to 2008, I had started writing. I started writing my blog. And I strongly recommend that every one of you start your own blog if you haven't already done so. Blog the things you're learning about. I can't tell you how many times that I'm trying to figure out a problem and I type it into Google and my own blog post comes up because I'd already solved that problem 3 years ago, right? So use your blog as a way to record the things you're learning, and then other people have the opportunity to learn from you as well. It also allows other companies to see who you are as a person and whether or not you're the kind of person that they would like to have on their teams. So that will help your career. Get yourself out there in public. The other thing I talk about frequently, start speaking, right? Come up, whatever it is that's interesting to you. Talk to your boss and say, "Hey, I'd like to do a presentation on this. And, let's just do a lunch and learn." And generally speaking, the boss is going to say, "Okay, that sounds like a good idea," right? Then your colleagues get a chance to learn about the things that are interesting to you, and hopefully the things that are relevant to the business. They get a sense of respect for the kinds of things that you have learned and that you can do to help the company. Take the presentation to your local user group and say, "Hey, I'd like to do this presentation." And I haven't yet run into a user group that isn't looking for new content, right? So it gives you an opportunity to share that content with other people that do the same kind of things that you do across companies. And it does take a little bit more to put together a presentation than it does to just learn, just do the job that you do every day. but that gives you more of an opportunity to learn that, right? You learn more by presenting a subject than you do by just doing the job every day, right? But then when you start presenting, you start meeting people that come to you as the expert on whatever it is you talked about. And that builds your network of people. Take your abstract and submit it to a SQL Saturday. Now you go to a SQL Saturday and you're one of the speakers, and you meet the other speakers in the speaker room when you're preparing for your presentation. And again, you're building your network. It's a way for you to improve yourself and to stay on top of the technology and become more valuable to your company. I hope that was kind of a long-winded answer. Hopefully it was the right one.
Yeah, we have other questions, but we ran out of time. So one question was, what do you prefer, relational or non-relational databases? What is your preference? And what do you think in the future?
It's a loaded question.
Yes.
I've been working with SQL Server since 1992, and I prefer the relational database. But you know, I'm going to be 65 next week, so you know, I'm old and I can retire soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alan, for your presentation, and thank you everybody for attending this session. We will have another session in 1 minute. So thank you, our sponsor, but thank you so much, Alan.
Email me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And you will see this session recorded in 2 weeks.